Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to talk about the HOA that wants me to give them access to my house on the beach. If you've ever been told to get off your own porch because a committee you never joined wants their turn on your view, you'll understand why my hands still shake when I think about that Sunday. Picture this: a salt-streaked breeze coming off the estuary, gulls heckling the tide, and me on my cabin steps with a coffee I didn't realize I was strangling. The paper taped to my door said, "Notice to vacate common area," in 12-point bold, like a parking ticket stapled to a sunset. The signature line had a swooping flourish. By order of the board. It didn't name which board. It didn't have a case number. It wasn't from any court, but printed near the bottom in smaller letters was HOA, as if that acronym alone could deputize a piece of printer paper and the guy who brought it. The man who posted it, well, posted is generous, he used 3-inch construction staples, was standing in my driveway like he'd paid for it. Short, tanned, the kind of confident that comes from having never been told no in a way that stuck. "You'll have to be out by next weekend," he said. He introduced himself as Devrin, then gave me a handshake that felt like someone trying to wring water from a rag. "Our members need to relax by the river," he went on, sweeping his hand at the view as if he were God and I was an unfortunate landscaping choice. "This is not your river," I said. "It's a river, and this here," I tapped the cabin's railing, "is my porch, my land, my permits, my taxes, my everything." He blinked in a long, patient way. "People like him rehearse blink rates to look reasonable. We're not trying to be adversarial," he said. "Our HOA maintains the beach trail and the road. We've decided to designate this a common area for seasonal relaxation." "You've decided to designate my property?" I laughed, which made it worse because it came out a little panicked. "This isn't even beachfront. You can get closer to the water by walking down another 30 yards because my cabin isn't on the water. There's a public right-of-way over there. You want to relax? Be my guest. Just not on my deck." He gestured at my dock, my picnic tables, the solar string lights I hung last 4th of July, the little footbridge I built to spare the marsh grasses. "It's all very inviting," he said, like that made it legally his. "You made it that way." I also poured the footings, filed the stormwater plan, and kept it out of the vegetated buffer per county code. "Not because I enjoy paperwork, but because I didn't want to be that guy," I said. "You're making me reconsider." He smiled the way you smile at a friend's toddler and crouched to peel the backing off another notice. "As I said, we're trying to keep it friendly, but if you don't comply, our enforcement committee will impose fines." "You can't fine me," I said. "I'm not in your HOA." "It's a community," he replied, as if that explained jurisdiction. "You're in the community." My friend Cass pulled into my driveway right then, tires crunching gravel with a sound that saved me. Cass hadn't come for a fight. She'd driven over with her dog to watch the tide flip. She's one of those people who can ask, "What's going on?" in a voice soft enough to land a moth. Devrin turned to her and introduced himself as president, which made Cass aim her eyebrows at me. I shrugged. Some roles are self-appointed. "Look," I said, "I don't want your members to hate me, but this is the wrong hill for you. And by hill, I mean civil plot with a recorded deed and a mortgage payment big enough to make me cry at tax time. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid, hostility," he said. "We can schedule your use of this area after we've rotated through our signups, maybe evenings and weekdays." My coffee went cold in my hand. I pictured waking up on my own couch to find Devrin's committee grilling sausages on my fire ring, and someone I'd never met napping in my hammock. I pictured my late grandfather's tackle box, the one I keep under the stairs, cracked open by grubby hands looking for lures. The absurdity of it burned through the fog. "My use?" I repeated. "You can get closer to the river than I can, and the county built the public stairs you ignore because you like my boardwalk better. Either way, I'm not in your calendar." "Then we'll start fines," he said, glancing down at a clipboard. "We're very reasonable. $50 a day at first." I stared at him long enough to count his pores. Cass squeezed my elbow once. "Okay," I said finally, more calm than I felt. "Start whatever you think you can start." "I'm going to start my camera." I pointed at the trail cam I'd mounted above the steps the summer someone's teenager tried to pry up one of my cedar boards to make a skimboard. "And at the end of this conversation, I'm going to start calling people. County recorder, code enforcement, the sheriff's non-emergency line to log that a private organization is threatening to extort me for not leaving my own land." His tone shifted from paternal to annoyed. "There's no need to escalate. You'll find we have broad authority. Over your members," I said, scrolling my phone. Not over a guy who bought this place from a retired bait shop owner, got a survey, and read the covenants before he closed. I found the screenshot I kept like a talisman. The title report with the parcel number, the line that said, "No HOA restrictions apply." I held it up. "You want a copy?" He didn't glance at it. "I'll have our attorney contact you," he said. And the way he said "our attorney" had the glide of someone who enjoys putting people on defense. "Lovely," I said. "Have them spell your HOA's exact name correctly so I can give the county the right acronym when I ask where you imagine your jurisdiction comes from." He left without another word, which I counted as a win, except for the notices still stapled to my posts. Cass's dog, Daisy, sniffed them like they were a new species. I pulled them down with careful tugs, slid them into a gallon Ziploc, and labeled it with the date and time because I was raised by a school nurse who taught me to record everything. Cass followed me into the cabin and set her keys on the counter. "That was something," she said. I tried not to laugh, I said. And then I started, because adrenaline does weird things to people who spent their formative years being polite. By the time I stopped, my throat felt raw. "I'll be here every weekend this summer if you want eyes," she said. "You shouldn't be alone in this." I didn't plan any of what happened after, but now that I have the benefit of hindsight, I can see the path as clearly as the footbridge I built. The next morning, before I was fully awake, I called the county recorder and asked whether the Harbor View Association, one of 6 possible names printed on my visitor's clipboard, had any legal tie to my parcel. The clerk, a patient woman with the kind of voice that could soothe a lightning strike, looked up my property, then read out loud the sequence of documents recorded against it: deed of trust, septic permit, shoreline exemption, no CC and Rs from any association. "If an HOA isn't tied to your parcel in recorded covenants, they can't enforce over you," she said. "They can posture, and they can call code enforcement on you like any neighbor, but they can't fine you." "Could they designate my deck as their common area?" I asked. There was a pause. I felt like a smile. "No." I left that conversation light enough to float. It lasted until 2 days later, when a letter arrived from a law office whose logo looked like a key on top of a mountain. The letter had more flourishes and Latin than a graduation mass, but the gist was simple. They said I was encroaching on a community waterfront, and that I had no right to exclude members of the association from the riverfront amenity space. They attached a photo of my deck. They demanded I vacate and desist within 5 days. They warned of sanctions and assessments and of lien rights. I read it twice. I made a photocopy and put it in the folder with my permits. Then I did something that even now surprises me. I drove to a neighbor's house who I knew had an HOA sticker in her car window and knocked. Her name was Lainey, a nurse who moved in last year with her teenage son. She answered with a cautious smile, like she didn't know whether I was a contractor or a solicitor. I showed her the letter. "Is your HOA telling you my porch is theirs?" I asked. Her face contorted into shapes I'd never seen on a human. "What?" she said. "No. People are weird about your place because it's nice. But we have a path to the river. The county built stairs. The association's supposed to maintain the trash cans." "Do you know Deveron?" I asked. She squinted. "He's the guy who sends out email blasts about how many leaves we can have on lawns. Is this one of his things?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'm putting it on the record. If he's telling your neighbors they can come sit on my deck, I need to know who spread that idea." She shook her head. "My son uses your footbridge sometimes because it's prettier. He swears he never goes onto your deck. I remind him other people's stuff is other people's stuff." She hesitated. "But when the big windstorm knocked down that old pine, you let my son and his friend take free firewood from the stacks you cut. People remember that stuff. It's why I moved out here from town. I wanted a neighborhood, not a club." That sentence lodged itself in me, a hook that would pull a lot of later choices into place. I thanked her and drove home, where I started making a list. I'm a list person. Something about ink on paper calms me. My list had 3 columns: law, neighbor, and sanity. Under law, I wrote every permit number and code section I could find on my shelf. Shoreline exemption, dock permit, septic inspection dates, clearance letters. Under neighbor, I wrote names of people I'd helped or who seemed reasonable. Under sanity, I wrote things that would stop me from turning into a full-time boundary troll. Go fishing at sunup, invite the retired guy with the Labrador to teach me knots, fix the squeak on the screen door. I also did something my grandfather would have called setting the table for trouble. I printed fresh, no trespassing private property signs that referenced the county code section enabling enforcement and the state statute for criminal trespass. I posted them at all four corners of the property and at the top of my deck steps. I also put up a sign I'd hoped never to need. "Smile, you're on camera," with a friendly cartoon lens. Then I walked the property line with my survey in one hand and bright flags in the other, and tied a ribbon on every rebar stake and cedar stake the surveyor had pounded years ago. The riverbank isn't a straight line. Nothing living is. But those stakes had been my compass during construction. Seeing them again made me feel better than coffee. The first actual escalation was ridiculous enough to be funny if it hadn't made my stomach flip. A carload of college-aged folks in matching t-shirts pulled into my driveway like they were late to a picnic. They waved cheerfully, lugged a cooler between two of them, and asked where they should set up. I reminded them this was private property, pointed down the public path, and watched confusion ripple across their faces like you see in a math class when one student realizes the equation on the board doesn't match the test. The girl at the front pulled out her phone and scrolled. The HOA email said the river hangout spot was the deck with string lights. "That email was wrong," I said, my voice doing that firm but kind thing you do when a toddler reaches for a stovetop. "The public hangout spot is that way. It's closer to the water than my deck is, please, and thank you." They apologized, and one of them, I learned his name was Jonah later, asked if I built the little footbridge. When I said yes, his whole face lit up. "It's so cool," he said. "My aunt uses a walker and can do the footbridge with her cane. She couldn't do the old muddy spot." That led to a conversation about the ramps I'd built, the grip strips I'd screwed in at exactly 8-inch intervals, because I once watched a vet in a wheelchair slip on a slickboard at a state park and promised myself I wouldn't build a hazard. This is where the second plot thread wove in: accessibility. I hadn't built a commercial facility. I hadn't opened for business, but I'd built with the same standards out of stubborn decency. I liked that people who didn't win mobility lotteries could still feel the wind over that river. Jonah and his friends trundled off down the public stairs with their cooler, and I was left in the quiet, suddenly aware of how quickly an HOA email could turn humans into polite trespassers. That week, I got visits from people who introduced themselves as part of the enforcement committee, the way kids claimed the front seat by yelling "shotgun." A woman named Trish walked the property with a clipboard and told me my dock looked non-conforming. She's the kind of person who pronounces non-conforming like a curse. I offered her the binder with my permits. She refused to touch it. "I'll get our engineer to look," she said. "Your engineer can look from the public path," I said. "If he steps onto my property without my say-so, the sheriff's deputy who lives 2 streets over will have a word." "You can't stop us from accessing common areas," she said. "You don't have any here," I said, cheery as a mailbox. "You want to hang out? Go closer to the water. I'll even show you where the wild blackberries branch out." Trish sniffed like the air offended her. "Expect formal notice," she said, and left. The notice came in triplicate, like they were worried I'd run out of refrigerator magnets. It threatened fines. It scheduled my own deck for member relaxation times on Saturdays. It warned me not to violate the spirit of community by using exclusionary language. That last line made my hands go cold. Exclusionary. I thought about Jonah's aunt, who could traverse my bridge because I and a contractor had laid boards flush and level against resistive posts sunk to code. I thought about every time I'd waved a kid off my porch, not because I don't like kids, but because I've seen embers pop from a fire ring like a snake's tongue. I thought about private property law, which isn't magic. It's the boring, essential backbone that lets us build a life without asking permission from a guy with a clipboard. So I did what the nice clerk had told me I could do. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and asked how to file a trespass letter of consent. In my county, property owners can sign a letter authorizing deputies to act on their behalf if someone refuses to leave. I drove to the station with my deed, signed the form, and shook the hand of a deputy named Merrick, whose day had probably included weirder. He told me gently to consider installing better lighting near the driveway. "When people get told the word no, they sometimes forget being decent," he said. I nodded and bought 2 motion sensor lights on my way home. The very next Saturday, the HOA decided to test their schedule the way a toddler tests bedtime. I woke up to laughter. Not the neighbor kind, the "we paid for this campsite" kind. When I stepped outside, there were 4 folding chairs on my deck. a little Bluetooth speaker chirping, and two older men in matching polo shirts thumbing their phones like the river owed them signal. One had a pair of tongs and a bag of charcoal. "Morning," he said like we were roommates. "We've got the 9 a.m. slot." "You've got the public stair slot," I said, pointing. "This is private." "Our president said—" "Your president can start his own deck," I said. And I smiled because I've learned smiling makes certain men angrier faster than yelling. And angry people make more obvious mistakes in front of cameras. "You can go closer to the water than I can. You'll get better breeze there anyway." He puffed up. "We'll call the cops." "Please do," I said, and I stepped aside to give him space on my porch where the motion camera could see both his face and the sign behind him that said private property. He dialed. He waited. The deputy who arrived 20 minutes later was Merrick. He recognized me from the station and tipped his hat. The men went from blustery to embarrassed in a way that would have been funny if it hadn't been happening on my cedar boards. Deputy Merrick listened to them, then to me, then asked to see my letter of consent. I handed it over. He looked it over and nodded. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is not common area. This is posted and recorded as private property. He is not part of your association. You can go down the public access, the one literally closer to the river than this deck, or you can leave." They sputtered. They invoked Deveron's name like a password. Deputy Merrick's eyebrows didn't move. "Today, you get a warning," he said. "Next time I write a citation. If you get yourselves trespassed, your president can argue about community spirit from a different porch." They packed their chairs. As they lugged their stuff down the public stairs, I felt a rush of relief so strong I had to sit. Merrick told me what he tells everyone in my situation. "Record everything. If you get threats, call us. If they mail you fines, keep the envelopes and the postmarks." He added softer, "And don't let this break your brain. Sometimes people who love rules forget why rules exist." By the time he left, Cass had texted, "Want me to grab donuts for the security briefing?" I told her yes, and also bring extra napkins because my hands were shaking again. She showed up with cinnamon twists, and we made the kind of plan that looked silly on paper, but saved me later. We decided I'd hold a community open deck day. Not for the HOA, but for the actual community. The neighbors within shouting distance who weren't trying to annex my porch. I thought if people could see how my place worked, where the line was between public path and private deck, where the fire ring was and why I kept the wood bin covered, maybe the relaxation space myth would die a natural death. The day we held it, a breeze pushed the river's surface into little scales of light. I set out lemonade in a big water cooler. I printed maps that showed my property line in bright yellow and the public right-of-way in bright blue. I brought out my binder of permits and set it on a table like a PTA display. People came. Laney brought cookies. Jonah brought his aunt, who took the footbridge with tiny measured steps and then sat in a chair near the edge where the deck meets the sandy path and sighed like she'd been holding her breath for a month. "I get why people want to sit here," she said, and the way she said it made me both proud and defensive. I told everyone the same thing. I built this because I love it. I keep it because it's safe. I'm happy to wave at anyone walking by on their way to the public area. I will call the sheriff if you set up a living room on my deck. Most people nodded. A few rolled their eyes. One man asked whether he could book the deck for his nephew's birthday party. "Yes," I said. "If you rent the cabin from me for the weekend and agree to the rules in the rental agreement and bring your own trash bags and leave the deck cleaner than you found it." He smirked and walked away, which told me everything I needed to know. Deveron did not come. Trish walked by at the end, took a photo like she was gathering evidence against Lemonade, and left without speaking. I didn't take her photo back. I figured my cameras had done that already. 2 days later, code enforcement left me a voicemail. An anonymous complaint alleged that I'd built a non-compliant structure within the shoreline buffer, that my lighting endangered sensitive species, and that I was operating an unlicensed event venue. The inspector, a patient man named Hollis, came out with a clipboard and a laser measure, and one of those little rolling wheels that make sidewalks feel like tape measures. He wore waders like he was prepared to trudge right into the river if a code section told him to. I walked him through the permits. He looked at everything. He took photos from the public path and from my deck with my permission. "You did this right," he said at the end, like I'd passed a test I didn't know I was taking. I don't get to say that very often. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it in a way that made my throat tight. "Do you need me to do anything else? I'll write a letter closing the complaint. If anyone tells you you're in violation, give them my card," he said. He He handed me a rectangle of paper that felt like armor. If this were a tidy story, that would have ended it. But HOAs are like tides. Even when the surface looks calm, a lot of water is moving. The calm lasted 6 days. Then, at dusk on a Friday, I heard metal on metal and stepped out to see 2 men cutting the little lock on my firewood bin. I called out. They flinched. Then one of them, shirtless, sunburned, with a beer tucked into his back pocket, called back, "Community Woodman." He gestured at the HOA sticker on his cooler like it was a permit. I told him no. I told him to put the bolt cutters down or I'd call the sheriff. He called me names that will never make it onto a sign at a lemonade stand. I called the sheriff. While we waited, he kept yanking at the bin like obstinacy could unscrew bolts. When Deputy Merrick's cruiser pulled in, the 2 of them pivoted mid-yank into a story about how their president said my place was theirs. Merrick's expression, somewhere between tired and astonished, told me this was not the first time he'd heard that sentence out here. He took statements, wrote citations, and asked if I wanted to file a formal trespass. I did. He wrote it. He also suggested, calm as a pond, that I consider civil remedies if this continued. Like what? I asked, because the law in my head was a tangle of newspaper headlines and things my grandfather said when the neighbor's goats hopped the fence. Like an injunction, he said. Like documenting damages for small claims. Like sending a cease and desist. Or, if it really goes sideways, a harassment restraining order. He paused. I can't give you legal advice, but I can tell you I've seen people stand up to unreasonable behavior and win. I slept badly that night. The way you sleep when you've learned the story you're in isn't a one-act. I kept seeing my dock, my footbridge, my string lights, my bin with the little brass lock I'd installed, because raccoons are smarter than we give them credit for. I kept seeing that word from the letter, encroaching. It's hard to describe the way that word worms into your brain when you grew up trying to be neighborly. It makes you feel like you're the one doing the wrong thing by existing in your own space with your own stuff. The next morning, I did something that would become the pivot. I called a lawyer. Not a fancy firm with a mountain logo. A solo practitioner named Rafe who keeps his office above a pizza place and knows the county code better than some commissioners. I told him in a rush the entire saga. He listened. He asked smart questions. He told me what I already knew, which is always somehow comforting, and what I didn't, which is always somehow terrifying. They're making claims they can't enforce, he said, but they're making them loudly. That can cross into nuisance, trespass, and tortious interference if it causes measurable harm. Have they cost you actual money yet? Yes, I said, thinking of a weekend renter who canceled after reading a neighborhood Facebook thread calling my place a stolen deck. I have the messages. Good, he said, and then apologized for saying good about my lost income. I mean good evidence. Keep everything. Screenshots, names, dates. If their board is acting beyond their authority, their insurance carrier won't love that. And if they've claimed lien rights they don't have, that's slander of title. You can push back hard. I don't want to scorch the earth, I said. I want to fish off my dock and not have strangers holding a book club on my steps. Then we start with a letter, he said. Cite the law, set the boundary. Make a demand that they cease communications to you except through counsel. And we tell them, in small, polite words, to stop directing people to your property. If they don't, we escalate. I liked the way he said we. That afternoon, while Rafe drafted, I sat on my deck with a notepad and watched the river. A blue heron stood as still as a rumor in the reeds. The wind shifted, bringing the deep, wet smell that tells you the tide is turning even if you can't see it. Daisy barked at nothing and Cass laughed and told her she was brave. I wrote down everything good about this place, so I'd remember why I was doing this when the next ridiculous thing happened. Because the next ridiculous thing was already in motion. As if on cue, a flatbed truck pulled into the HOA's little gravel lot down by the public path and offloaded pallets of cheap gray pavers. 5 men in neon t-shirts started laying them in a hasty rectangle right at the edge of the marsh grass, within the area I knew was regulated as a vegetated buffer. Deverin stood with his hands on his hips like a general surveying a battlefield. From where I sat, it looked like an unpermitted patio. And if there's one person the county takes more seriously than a homeowner with proper permits, it's a homeowner trying to out-stubborn a marsh. I took photos. I took a video where I narrated exactly how far their paver line was from the flagged buffer stakes I'd seen county staff place last spring. I emailed the videos to the address Hollis had written on the back of his business card. I did not include commentary. Facts are better than adjectives in moments like that. Then I called Lainey. "Don't bring your kid down there today," I said. "And maybe tell the guy with the kayak rack that if his HOA gets dinged by the state for messing with a marsh, the fines can be a doozy." "What are they doing?" she asked, horrified. "Trying to create their own relaxation area without doing any of the things I did to get actual approval," I said. "They could be fine if they kept it outside the buffer. They're not," she sighed. "I'll text who I can." By dusk, the pavers were half laid and the marsh looked like a patient with a bad shave. I stayed on my deck, because I didn't need to march down there and give anyone the satisfaction of a confrontation on camera. I ate leftover pizza and watched swallows flicker over the water. The tide came in, touched the new edge of their square like a cat testing a stranger's shoe, and kept right on swelling. A small part of me almost felt sorry for whoever would have to undo that mess, almost. By Monday morning, the county had posted a bright orange stop work notice on a sawhorse near the pavers. By Tuesday afternoon, a state environmental officer in a green jacket with a patch I hadn't seen before was measuring from the flags with a sternness I reserve for the sound my smoke detector makes when I forget the oven is on. By Wednesday, the HOA listserv was on figurative fire. Neighbors from as far as the upper street calling me everything from a saint to a snitch. I didn't engage. I hung a wind chime I'd been meaning to put up. It clinked and sang and then did something else. It told me when a storm was coming, because the wind changed first on the river. I like it when objects pull double duty. The night before Rafe sent his letter, I walked the property once more, touching every post and rope and board like I was blessing them. I stopped at the edge where my deck stairs meet the sandy path and thought about all the people who wanted the same thing. To be near water without being inconvenienced by the fact that land has owners and laws and physical limits. I thought about the kid who left a thank you note under a rock on my steps last summer after I'd pointed him toward the public path and joked that my deck's sunbeams were reserved for my coffee and the gull who likes to scold me. I went to bed early and dreamed that my dock pulled up its own pilings and floated away, waving a little cedar board as it went. When I woke, both the dock and I were still there. The tide was out, the mudflats glistening like someone spread varnish over 100 yards. The heron was back, and so I figured would the HOA be, drawn to a boundary like moths to a porch light. Rafe's letter went out at 9. By 9:15, Devon emailed with the subject, regret, claiming there'd been misunderstanding but insisting I was obligated to share community amenities. He CC'd his lawyer. Rafe replied with citations, recorded documents, and the county's stop work order on their paver relaxation area. He used liability more than once and told them to stop using my address or photos in member emails. It wasn't spicy. It was the kind of letter that makes you realize you stepped into traffic thinking it was a treadmill. Their attorney, stiff as a flag in no wind, suggested mediation. Rafe said we'd mediate an apology. I printed that and stuck it to my fridge. The wall arrived as a meeting notice slid under my door. Special HOA board meeting regarding riverfront amenities. Soon there were folding chairs under a pop-up canopy by the public path, neighbors circling with coffee and little dogs. I brought a camp chair and sat on my side of the line with a notepad. Cass came with Daisy. Lainey parked like she might need to leave fast. Jonah stood with his aunt in the shade. Devon opened like a coach. Summer is short, everyone deserves the river. Heads bobbed. Then he pivoted. A certain neighbor had excluded members from the traditional relaxation area, called law enforcement, contacted code enforcement, and harassed our volunteers. Point of order from someone not in your order, I said. You have a public path closer to the water than my deck. You want River Joy without permits? Use it. A few people laughed. Trish glared like Joy violated dress code. Devon lifted paperwork. We have lien rights and enforcement authority. Over your members, I said. Not me. See the county's stop work order on your illegal patio? I pointed at the orange notice flapping like a warning flag. Call me a harasser again, and a different letter gets written. A guy in a baseball hat spoke up. Why'd we spend $5,000 on pavers we can't use? My dues went up. We had a plan, Trish said, shooting me a look. Someone undermined it. The state undermined it, Lainey said. They said don't pave the marsh, and the marsh agreed. Energy shifted, questions reigned. Who authorized the patio? Did we get a permit? Why direct people to the deck with string lights if it wasn't ours? Why fines? A man in a green jacket with a badge patch stepped forward. Because our agency regulates the buffer, he said. We told you to stop. You didn't. Remove the pavers and restore the buffer or we will. and we'll bill you with penalties. If officers directed construction without approval, we can hold the association and specific officers personally liable. We don't negotiate access on private property. We protect the shoreline for everyone." Silence. Devon opened and closed his mouth. Trish hugged her clipboard. A few folks drifted away. Coffee had run out and the hard part had arrived. Agent Simmons walked to my flagged line. "You the homeowner?" "I am. Binder and calluses. Saw your videos. Helped." He nodded at my deck. "You kept out of the buffer. Nice work. If they drag their feet on restoration, call us." They jellied their feet anyway, claiming they had to survey the membership. Simmons answered with a deadline. Meanwhile, the HOA's lawyer pushed mediation. Rafe reiterated our version. A public apology. Written acknowledgement I wasn't a member, a promise to stop directing people to my property. Notice to their insurer. Indemnity for trespass claims, and clean retractions. Life kept rolling. An anniversary couple renting my cabin got spooked by a thread captioned, "Community visits welcome," under a photo of my deck. I sent the sheriff's trespass letter and the county's closure notice, offered a discount. They declined and came anyway. I stalked the place, left a tide chart and bright yellow cards quoting the trespass statute, the county posting law, and the non-emergency number. At sunset, sweatshirted HOA folks clustered at the public access, glaring like my string lights were a personal insult. The renters sat steady. At dawn, a guy named Kirk hopped my rope to reserve seats until a jogger with a GoPro called, "You're on private property, man." The clip hit a local forum and flipped the narrative from gatekeeper to entitled. By Tuesday, rumors said the insurer wanted to know about no intentional law-breaking and whether officers had directed trespass. The board announced an emergency assessment for anticipated legal costs. At the hardware store, the cashier said, "Treat a shoreline like a clubhouse. The shoreline hands you a bill." Members launched a recall, led by a quiet motor fixer named Andre. I watched from my side of the line. Rafe told me to keep the folder neat. Flags went into the soil, a skid steer beeped, and pavers, plus 2 illicit footings, thudded into a trailer. Restoration crews seeded the scar and staked coconut logs. Trish asked Simmons to delay for a morale event. "The only event is undoing what you did," he said. At the recall meeting, Andre read dates, not adjectives. Hands rose, polite clapping followed. Devon's confidence looked sun-melted. Trish slipped away, clipboard creaking. The new board emailed, "We are sorry," attaching Simmons's and the county's letters. They retracted claims about my deck, promised not to direct anyone there, and committed to restore the buffer and sword insurance. Rafe drafted a non-disturbance agreement. "I'm not a member. They have no rights to my property. No directing anyone there. They'll pay my costs if an officer does, and any improvement near the public path requires permits first." They signed. We recorded a memorandum with the county. To clean the online stain, Rafe suggested small claims against posters implying I stole community property or illegally closed access. I filed for a lost rental and a snapped woodbin lock. Deputy Merrick brought incident reports. Hollis and Simmons wrote letters. The judge said, "You don't get to invent rights and punish someone for not honoring them," and awarded me rental value, hardware, and fees. Word traveled. The new board said it wouldn't pay for former officers' willful acts. Devon moved away. Jonah asked to learn to set a post. His aunt sat near my edge, not on it, and pitched a river steward volunteer crew for public access. Agencies liked it. The new board promoted it. I donated posts. Kids planted natives where the pavers had scarred the marsh. Not everyone forgave. Trish filed 2 noise complaints. Merrick wrote no violation and suggested a timer for my string lights. Done. One rogue staked a community river lounge sign with a drawing of my deck. Andre shut it down. The river is public in places and private in places. If you're confused, ask. A week later, the non-disturbance agreement arrived stamped. Rafe framed my copy as a joke. It hangs beside the tide chart. One tells me when water rises, the other tells me what won't. The punishment landed where it should: state fine, insurer paying restoration but not penalties, small claims judgment, recall, trespass letters on file. I built a low cedar rail with a gentle click gate and a small sign. Speak friend and enter. Friends ask first. Some evenings I stand with coffee, listening to ducks land like paper airplanes, a kid try to skip a rock, and the river move patient and sure. I'm still on my deck, with my permits, my boundary, and a moral as plain as the tide. You don't have to be mean to be firm. Everyone can relax by the river without stealing someone's steps. Paper beats bluster, marsh grass beats pavers. A recall beats a feud, and the best revenge is a neighbor's kid planting a seedling where arrogance used to be, and watching it take root. Friends, thank you. See you soon.